Welcome in to Vol Basketball Fever, your number one source for discussions about the Vols and Lady Vols basketball programs. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a video, and check in every week for new episodes of the show, video breakdowns, and more. Now, on with the episode. Hello, everyone, and welcome in to another episode of the Vol Basketball Fever podcast. I'm Nathanael Rutherford, joined by Gene Henley once again. I want to thank you all for tuning in to another episode of the show. If you're new here, thank you so much for tuning in. If you're watching this on YouTube or if you're listening to it on your podcaster app of choice, thank you so much. Subscribe to the channel if you're here watching Gene and I talk in quote unquote in person here live and in video color. And if you're listening wherever you are, you can subscribe to us anywhere you get your podcasts. Leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcast if you can, and also leave us a 5-star review on Spotify. You can do that now as well. Again, subscribe to the channel, share this video with your friends, and give this video a like. It really helps us out, and it helps the old YouTube algorithm stuff out as well. Well, Gene, first of all, I want to say happy MLK Day to everybody who's listening, or even if you're not listening on Monday. We're recording this on MLK Day. So again, happy Martin Luther King Jr. Day to all of you out there. But Gene, we have some interesting topics to discuss here. A game where I was asked by a couple of people on Twitter if I was going to do a reaction podcast or reaction video or whatever to the Kentucky game. And I thought no, because I don't want to talk about this game ever again if I can help it. But I want to talk about it with you. So, and I kind of want to get my thoughts out about it and just kind of this team as a whole, because last time we talked, we didn't talk about this game necessarily a ton. We talked a little bit more, just kind of in general, answered a lot of questions that ended up all being basically about Rick Barnes from our listeners and stuff. So again, thank you all who sent in questions. Go back and watch that video. I think a lot of the questions still pretty much are pertain to the situation now. I don't know that we've had any more or less answers than we did back then, but check it out because we didn't talk a ton of Kentucky until the last little bit of that podcast. But Gene, obviously Tennessee goes up to Lexington and they didn't just lose. They got absolutely blown out of the water. 107-79. Kentucky shot 78, almost 79% in the first half of that game. Shot only 57% in the second half. Finished the game shooting 68% from the floor, 61% from three, and they went 20 of 21 from the free throw line. So part of me looks at that and says, okay, Kentucky was going to beat. If they played Duke, if they played Gonzaga, if they played Auburn, it didn't matter who they had played that game. They're winning that game. If you shoot 20 of 21 from the free throw line, it ain't about your team's defense as much as it is about that team just being on. At the same time, though, Tennessee's defense looked the worst it's looked all season in terms of, I've thought a lot of this season, and really kind of a lot under Rick Barnes, this team has a tendency to kind of overhelp on switches and stuff. I thought in this game, they weren't helping enough, and they were letting Kentucky drive in the lane. They're giving plenty of wide open threes. Kentucky finished the game with only 36 points in the paint, but they had 27 fast break points compared to 1 fast break point from Tennessee. And they had 32 points off of turnovers, and Tennessee only had 11. Tennessee turned the ball over, 17 times in the game. Kentucky turned over, Tennessee turned over 20 times in the game. I was looking at the assist numbers. Kentucky turned over 12. Gene, I'm not ready to jump off a cliff in this game. I will say I was upset mentally and stuff on Saturday, but I stopped watching in the second half because I thought I've got better things to do. I have things around the house I got to finish up. I'll watch highlights later if I really want to, but I had basically seen all I needed to see at that point to know what to talk about from that game. Tennessee's offense was fine. You and I were talking before we started recording here. If Tennessee scores 79 points in any other game this season, they were possibly undefeated heading into the Kentucky game, because they would have outscored their opponent every single game except for the LSU game, and they would have tied LSU, would have gone to overtime had they scored 79 points in regulation against them. Offense wasn't necessarily the problem for Tennessee. Yes, they still missed some shots, but it was the defense. It was the fact that Kentucky literally could not miss in some cases. They started the game, I think, 5 of 5 from the floor. They had another 5 of 5 stretch there early in the first half too. I mean, Gene, how much, I guess basically, in your opinion, how much stock do you put into this game and judging Tennessee from it? And how much do you say, okay, Kentucky was just going to beat anyone they played? Because I think that's fair to say that Kentucky was just on and they were going to destroy whoever they played. But I think it's one thing to say that, another thing to give up 107 points in a college basketball game. Like that's got to be, I haven't looked at it, but that's the most points I'm betting that Tennessee's given up in. I mean, I'll look it up while you're talking, but it's been a very long time since Tennessee's given up 100 points in a basketball game in men's basketball. And I think there's plenty of criticism to go around from this game. And hopefully for Tennessee, this is a wake up call. But like, man, I've said that for a couple of games this year, I feel like. But this one, I feel like losing to your rival the way you did, surely it's a wake up call, right, Gene? If it's not this one, then I think Tennessee's staying asleep the rest of the year, because I don't know what would be a wake up call if not this one.
Right. Well, I look at this as more I look at it as more of a one-off, just because, I mean, like when I heard that morning about the passing of Joby Hall, I was thinking, if this is not if this is not like one of those just sorts of crazy sorts of games, they're either going to play really horribly or they're going to play really great. I didn't think there was going to be any in between. And like sometimes like a game really just kind of gets away from you. And it kind of, when I watched it, when I had the portions of the game that I watched, I'm just like, Kentucky's faster than all the loose balls. Kentucky is just not missing. And look, I mean, that was not exactly what you would call a good defensive game from Kentucky either. Let's be clear. I mean, Tennessee shot a nice percentage from the field. That was the best. I mean, we got to take this consideration too. That was the best offensive showing that anybody has had against Kentucky all year. That's tied for the most points anybody has scored on Kentucky this year. You know, Duke had 79 the first game of the season. And like I'm seeing, Tennessee shot a better percentage from the field. They shot a better percent. I mean, they made almost 50% from 3-point range. The 11 threes made were the second most by any team that Kentucky has faced.
Yeah, it was Tennessee's third best efficient, or whatever, the field goal percentage of the entire season. The only games that shot better were against Presbyterian and USC Upstate. So is their best best effective field goal percentage against an actual, legitimate opponent.
In a game that matters, in a game that really determines who you are. So I don't put a lot of stock. I'm always of the opinion, and look, I know this is an unpopular opinion, but in the sport of basketball, you play every single game. In each game, the goal of each and every game is to win. But I'm not a person who gets wrapped up in the rivalry stuff, because like the fact of the matter is, like, hey, Kentucky would have blown anybody out. It just so happened to be Tennessee, but Tennessee and Kentucky play again in 3 weeks or however long it is before they play again. So say Tennessee comes out and has this grand performance. Does that lessen what Kentucky did 2 days ago? No. Like in the grand scheme of things, yeah, maybe this is unfair, but I understand Rick Barnes has a winning record against Sean Calipari. I understand that. That's a nice thing. That's a nice thing for Tennessee fans to kind of prop up. It doesn't matter. Like, what are you doing in March? And unfortunately, that's the realization, because anytime I talk about individual games, fans come at me about, well, Barnes doesn't win in March. Okay, then don't bring up the stuff he does in January and February either. Just take the whole totality of the season to take each game like it matters. Each game matters. Each game matters. Or just simply the games in March matter. Like, so to me, I watched that game and I'm like, look, man, it stunk. It did. This is not football. It stunk to get beat like that on Saturday. But the day that Kentucky shoots 65% or whatever they shot from the field, like 80%, and like they did in the first half, that's not defensive lapses. I mean, it was a game plan that maybe, perhaps didn't work out, but it's not like Kentucky's a team that you're like, man, we got to watch out for the 3-point shooting. We got to watch out for how efficient they are offensively. Nobody's ever said that. I understand that effectively they've shot well this year. They're up to 12th in the country in effective field goal percentage now. And like, they do have a good offense, and that offense has a lot of different things working for it right now. I just don't think that what we saw on Saturday we're going to see again from that Kentucky team. Therefore, I don't think what we saw on Saturday we're going to see again from that Tennessee defense. So, yeah, lick your wounds, figure some stuff out, and get back at it. Because, I mean, obviously, your goals are still to do everything you can in March. And when you play that team again on February 15th in Knoxville, like, you certainly have some incentive to do things a lot differently than you did in the first game. You certainly have incentive to go out there and put together a much better defensive performance. Now, the offense may not look like that either, because that's a prideful team. So I don't expect the game to look like that the second meeting. But lick your wounds from this one. It stinks. Probably it hurts everybody. There's a lot of pride in that Tennessee program. Just lick your wounds and come back ready to go, because everything that you want to do, it's a good thing about basketball. Everything you want to do is still right there in front of you.
So I was looking back to see last time Tennessee gave up 100, and it's taken me a little bit. I forgot they gave up 99 in overtime to Purdue in that Sweet 16 game a few years ago. They gave it 99 once to Memphis a few years back too. Last time Tennessee gave up 100 in a game, oddly enough, was against Rick Barnes' Texas squad in 2007. That game, or I guess technically 2006, but the 06-07 season, when Tennessee won 111-105 in Knoxville in that game. And actually, that gave up 100 points twice that season. I read that year in New York City, they gave up 101 to North Carolina. So, and that team ended up going to the Sweet 16, and it was a second half collapse away from going to the Elite Eight against Ohio State that year. So, yeah, I mean, maybe it's not bad news Tennessee gave up 100. I don't know.
I say that we all forget. I mean, this, somewhat related, but not so much. Kentucky gave up like 118 points, I believe, to that Duke team with Zion and RJ Barrett and Cam Reddish. I believe it was 118-88.
They got stomped. I do remember that.
Yeah, it was. I'm pretty sure it was like 118-88 was the final score of that game. I know it was bad. And some of these things, like, yeah, it's not the end of the world. It's a bad performance that you can build on. And yeah, it stinks because, I mean, I think
by the way, you were almost spot on. It was 118-84. So you were
84.
Basically right.
Sorry.
Yeah.
So they gave up that was one of those like spotlight games in November when there's nothing else going on. If you're going to give up 100 something points in a game, do it on a Saturday when playoff games are going on, because I guarantee outside of Tennessee's and Kentucky's fan bases, there weren't a ton of eyes on that. Whereas that Duke Kentucky game was like the Champions Classic thing that they do every year, and I'm pretty sure. And obviously, you had all the star power with Zion and RJ Barrett and Cam Reddish and whoever Kentucky had that particular year. Like, there was a lot more eyes on that game, and Kentucky got absolutely destroyed. And I'm pretty sure that Kentucky went further that year than Duke.
Yeah, that year was the year that Kentucky had Tyler Hero, Keldon Johnson, Reed Travis, PJ Washington, Emmanuel quickly. So they had all those guys.
Yeah. That team that got beat by Auburn in the Elite Eight. I think Duke may have been beaten the same round by Michigan State. I know Duke didn't go to the Final Four. I know that for a fact. So, yeah, it stinks, man. It does. It stinks. But a game like that, there's going to be a game that just gets away from you every single season. And you hope it's not against a rival. But this time it was. So just lick your wounds and get back, because, like I said, this is basketball, man. Just focus, bang out the next game, because you've got much bigger issues. Like, you're 2-3 in the league. That's far more important than caring too much about what happens in one game. And that's why I don't think most basketball people put a ton of stock in what happens in just one particular conference game, because depending on the league, you've got 15 of them or 17 of them or 13 more of them that you've got to focus on. And each one is just all about jockeying position for the tournament. And look, they got embarrassed in a game much bigger than this. What was it, 3 years ago in Lexington, when they got beat by like 20 up there, like 88-68.
When Tennessee was the number one team in the country at that point.
Yeah. And game day was there, whatever it was. The game, Kentucky was in the 80s. Tennessee was in the 60s.
Mm-hmm.
How'd that work out in the end? Because
Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty sure Tennessee won 2 out of 3 that year, including a win in the SEC tournament. So who cares, man? It stinks. You hope that you look better. You didn't. You scored 80 points, bet off that offense. You gave up 107. Do some things better defensively. But that's not who you are defensively. So therefore, I'm not going to put a whole ton of stock into it. And I don't think others should either.
Yeah, I mean, you talked about being 2-3 in the SEC. It's not going to it's not really going to get that much easier with Tennessee either. You have you're playing on the road against Vanderbilt, who that should be a win, but Vandy's better this year than we were last year. And I mean, they're going to smell blood in the water. And then you play at home against LSU, home against Florida, and then away against Texas. Like Tennessee's road schedule to start January, I guess also to start SEC play looking at Alabama. I mean, that's brutal. You play 3 of your toughest opponents in your first 5 games of the SEC slate, and they're all away. It's at Alabama, at LSU, at Kentucky. Like the only thing worse is if you throw in at Auburn in there. And lucky for Tennessee, they don't play Auburn until the end of February. And when they do, it's at home. So like, I mean, that's almost literally as rough as it could have gotten for Tennessee to start the SEC slate. The only way it could have been worse is against Auburn too. So like that in itself too, like, and you've obviously lost all those games, and I mean, you had a chance to beat Alabama, and you were also, short COVID on that one because of your roster. But like, I mean, it's brutal. But like you said, they're 2-3, which I thought was a real distinct possibility at this point in the season that Tennessee be 2-3 in SEC play just because of who they were playing and when they were playing them and stuff. So they can and have a really good shot of improving to 3-3 against Vandy. I don't know that Tennessee beats LSU at home. They should beat Florida. So you're going to look at Tennessee being around 500 by the time they play Texas for that, the Big 12 SEC challenge. And then you got, thankfully, we talked about this before in the podcast, Gene, thankfully for Tennessee's sake, it's a much easier back half of the schedule than the front half. You host Texas A&M, you play at South Carolina, at Mississippi State, you host Vandy, you host Kentucky, at Arkansas, at Missouri, host Auburn, at Georgia, then host Arkansas to end the year. A lot of those are winnable. In fact, looking at KenPom, from February 1st onward, KenPom was only predicting Tennessee to lose one of those games. It's Kentucky. I think there's a chance, obviously, I think they lose to Auburn. I mean, I know it's home game, but that one right now is listed as a toss-up, that 50-50 with Tennessee, like having like a very small 73-72 advantage in that one. I think they lose to Auburn. But it wouldn't shock me if Tennessee only loses those 2 games. I mean, they could lose to Arkansas as well, because Arkansas has been kind of up and down, but I think they will be a team that improves with time. But I mean, 3 losses in the last half of the year is going to be a lot better and put you in a better position than where you are right now. So I don't know. It's going to be interesting. The SEC is a very up and down league this year, with Auburn seeming to be very much the number 1 team. And I think Kentucky's very much solidified themselves as number 2. And that's why this Kentucky-Auburn game, I mean, we won't talk about it because we're not a SEC podcast anymore, so I don't want to get too much into it, but that's going to be a fun one. That's going to be a very interesting one to battle out basically for the top spot in the SEC. And Auburn's now number 2 in the country, and you can make an argument for them being number 1. In fact, their fans are pretty mad about them not being number 1 because of one guy voting them like 9th. And if he had voted them in the top 5, they'd have been number 1 over Gonzaga, but whatever. Gene, I think to me, the more interesting conversation to have this game isn't even the game itself. It's kind of some questions to me that came out after the game in terms of something Rick Barnes said that I thought it kind of jogged my brain a little bit in terms of thinking about this team and the roster right now. Credit to Ben McKee, who writes for BallQuest and of course is a co-host on the Swan event, who I've also worked with Ben for a couple of years when I was in sports media as a full-time job. So I know Ben very well. And he was, I want to say he was in Lexington. Yeah, he was actually up in Lexington for the game. I was there for the post-game press conference with Rick Barnes. And Rick Barnes was asked about the player that he expects to step up as a leader in practice this week after this loss. And here's what Ben tweeted out. It's more or less the exact quote. It's probably a little bit of a, Twitter for constraints for the characters and stuff, but here's the quote. Well, the 2 guys that are most real without question are Urosh and Jemai, talking about Urosh Plavsic and Jemai Mashak. When they talk, it's authentic. Zakai, talking about Zakai Ziegler, has that respect if he wanted to do it, but he's a freshman. Santi, talking about Vescovi, maybe. Gene, I know that wasn't really like it wasn't asking who are the leaders on this team. It wasn't being asked specifically like, I guess he was asked who's he expected to step up as a leader. He said the guys who are the most real without question. So I don't think he was saying these are guys are the leaders on the team, but these are the guys that are the most real. Are a role player in Uroš Plašvik and a freshman. And then he mentioned another freshman. And then he said maybe Santi. Nowhere was there mentioned a John Fulkerson or, I mean, Vescovi, yes. Nowhere was there mentioned a Josiah Jordan James. Nowhere was there mentioned an Olivier Camois, which I get it. Camois was a role player up until this year too. But like, that was kind of surprising to me that those were the three, technically four, if you want to include Vescovi in there too, names that got mentioned for guys that could step up, because those are guys that don't play a lot of minutes. I think Zakai Ziegler does, but again, Jemai and Uroš play. Uroš is lucky if he plays 15 minutes in a game, and Jemai is lucky if he sees a court most games. He played almost 10 against Kentucky, but I wonder how many of those were in the second half. And then Uroš played 13 in that game. So you're talking about guys who don't start, unless you're making a start because of injury in Uroš's case. Guys who play 15 minutes or less in the majority of the games they play are your most real guys who have the most vocal leadership, I guess, maybe is what he was saying there. You can be a leader without having to be like an in your face, like Al Wilson type of guy. Like if you're looking at Tennessee football, you can be a leader without having to do that. But the question I think is, maybe it's a bit unfair. Maybe I should word it differently, but I think it's a question worth discussing, Gene, is, does Tennessee have a leadership issue? Does this team have the leadership it needs and the leadership like this specific roster needs with the young bench players and stuff? So I don't know if saying is there a leadership issue, if that's too harsh of a question, but is the question I'm asking, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on it, because I think you would have a really good insight on it.
Having played on teams, you typically need your better players to be your leaders. Mm-hmm. Like, I mean, I know in the, like people refer to it as like a dog mentality. Like it's a Juwan Jennings, it's an Admiral Schofield, Grant Williams. It's those people. You kind of need them to be the ones that are your most vocal components, your most vocal leaders. And who knows, like maybe the expectation is that, a guy like a Fulkerson or Josiah just do it. And maybe the way the question was posed, maybe Barnes was thinking that who do I expect to step up this week? Stepping up would suggest that they don't already do it. So that could be the case, but I don't love the fact that if we're going to take it at just how he said it, then you don't have some of those older guys who are the ones that you kind of turn to in some key moments. Look, I mean, yeah, you kind of, I mean, it would, you don't necessarily expect somebody like a Chandler or a Ziegler to be a freshman, but sometimes, I mean, I'm sorry, to be your leader, but that being said, they're also your point guards, and you kind of like your point guard to be your leader because they're the ones who typically have the ball in their possession almost every single play. So I think it's good that, somebody like Vescovi was mentioned in this regard, because he is a guy who can affect the game. I mean, with the ball in his hands. We can question how good of a point guard he is, but I will never question how good of a player he is. And when he's at his best when he's catching and shooting. I've said that for over a year now. I've said that pretty much as he got there. That's the type of guy who can be your vocal component. I don't know necessarily the international aspect of that. I mean, maybe is he comfortable in that role? But the fact of the matter is they need somebody in that role. And I'm not going to be a person who's going to get too concerned, because like I said in the last segment, this is not emergency break the glass time for Tennessee. Like, they've lost 3 games on the road, one of those shorthanded, and 2 against really good teams. I'm pretty sure that if the tournament were to start tomorrow, I think that maybe LSU, well, not now, but LSU, I think Saturday was like a 2 seed, and maybe Kentucky was a 4. Or I think Tennessee and Kentucky were playing for like a 4 seed or something like that. So that's who you've lost road games to when you were essentially at full strength. Alabama, I'm not exactly sure, but I don't really pay a ton of attention to bracketology. It was just something that was set my way for another reason. Mm-hmm. But like, we'll see over the next 3 to 5 games, like who the guys are that are the leaders of this team. It'll be done by their actions on the court. It'll be done by who you see being most vocal in timeouts, because Rick Barnes can't be the most vocal person every single timeout. The coaching staff, they can't be the most vocal people in every single timeout. There has to be a guy. Is it Sakai? Is it Josiah? Is it Fulkerson? Is it one of these guys? Like, that's one of the things that I would be interested to see going forward, because whoever the answer is, now's the time where, where it's not the Kentucky loss. It's the fact that you're 2-3 in the league. Details don't matter. Like, you don't get, you don't get quality points, or because, they lost at Alabama, but they weren't at full strength. Nobody cares. Like, nobody cares. Like, like Tennessee fans care. I get that, but you don't get 0.75 of a loss because you had guys missing. You get a loss, so you're 2-3, and like, this can go sideways really quick if somebody doesn't step up, because you mentioned it, man. The schedule, it does not get easier. Like, this January schedule, it is what it is, man. Like, it is not going anywhere. So I'll be interested to see who's the person whose production starts to maybe increase over the next few games. If it's one of those guys we mentioned, or if it's somebody we haven't even talked about, because those are the ones that are going to get this thing turned around.
Yeah, and I don't. It is interesting because, like I said, you don't have to be a big rah-rah guy to be a leader. Like, that's not a requirement. Like, you don't have to be, again, to go back to Tennessee football, you don't have to be an Al Wilson. You don't have to be a Jawan Jennings to be a leader on a team. You can be a quiet leader on the team, but you have to. There are things that need to change for this team moving forward to get to where they want to go. And maybe it's the fact that Gene, maybe this team just isn't great. Like, I think they're a good team. I think they're going to beat the teams. Most likely, they're going to beat the teams like Vanderbilt, South Carolina, Missouri. They're Texas A&M probably. A&M's have a better year than I thought they would. Like, they're going to beat those teams. Can they beat an LSU? Can they beat an Auburn? Can they beat a Texas? Can they go back and beat Kentucky when they play them at home? Like, those are the questions they have to answer, because I think Tennessee basketball is to a point where they're solid and they're good, but can they make that next step to be great and actually beat these quality teams that are Sweet 16, Elite 8, Final Four type teams? And like you said earlier too, like, fans all the time talk about regular season Rick, and that's kind of the moniker he's gotten from people who want to deride him for his lack of postseason success. Which, hey, that's fair. Like, the lack of postseason success is a fair criticism of Rick Barnes as a head coach. But like you said, you can't just say it only matters what you do in the postseason and then get furious when Tennessee goes and does some of the stuff in the regular season. When I was looking while you were talking, about half of Tennessee's Sweet 16 runs since, I guess, 2000, when that first Sweet 16 under Jerry Green, about half of them, the Tennessee's had anywhere between 9 and 11 losses, actually between 7 and 11 losses in the regular season. When they made those Sweet 16 runs, they had 7 to 11 losses by the time the regular season was over. Losing the SEC tournament and then lose in the tournament, so you had to tack on 2 more losses. But you look at the most recent one, obviously is a little bit different. Tennessee had 4 regular season losses in that Rick Barnes year where they went 31-6. But you look back at the Conzo year, they finished 24-13. So that means they had 11 losses in the regular season, and they were 11-7 in SEC play. You look back at, obviously, 2008, a little different. They finished 31-5. But you look at that 07 season when they made a Sweet 16 run and were very close to making it further in that year too. They finished 24-11. So that means they had 9 losses in the regular season. We talked about last week that Elite 8 team had 7 losses in the regular season. And then 5 losses for the Jerry Green team. But the Tennessee's teams that have gone on to make Sweet 16 runs, a lot of times haven't had like the most amazing regular seasons. In fact, the teams that for Tennessee lately in the past 20, 30 years that have had some of the best regular season records haven't actually had a whole lot of postseason success. You look at that 31-5 team under Pearl. They made it to a Sweet 16, which was good, but you could judge that team and say, hey, they maybe should have gone further. And I think they really should have gone further than they did that year. You look at the year under Rick Barnes, where Tennessee was number one for a month, and went 31-6. They should have gone further. You go back to Rick Barnes' third year when they were 26-9, lost in second round. They should have gone further. The only one that you can point to that lived up to expectations from what the regular season was that Elite Eight team. But even then, they had 7 losses in the regular season. They flirted with falling out of the top 25, just like this team is flirting with falling out of the top 25. And Tennessee, as we're recording this, the new AP poll came out today on Monday, Gene, and Tennessee is clinging by the skin of their teeth into the top 25. They're number 24. But that team that made the Elite Eight run dropped to number 20 after losing to, I think, Vanderbilt for the second time, I want to say. Oh, no, sorry. They lost to, where's it? I'm looking at the wrong thing here. They were on the 215 on the February 15th. They dropped down to 20th. That was because they lost to Vanderbilt by 19 on the road. A Vanderbilt team that was number 22 in the country, but still 19 to Vanderbilt on the road, and then lost to number 3 Kentucky by 11. And Tennessee dropped down to 20th, and that they had 2 mediocre wins against Georgia and South Carolina to, I think, bump up to 19, and they stayed 15 at the end of the year. But like, that team wasn't, I don't think people were expecting them to go to the Elite Eight when that regular season was over, and you're 23-7. And what were they in SEC play at that point? They finished the regular season 11-5 in SEC play, 3rd in the East back when they still did division alignments. So Tennessee was 11-5 in the SEC, which would translate to about I guess now like a 12-6 or so, probably, I guess would be close to what it would kind of translate to now, 12-6, maybe even 11-7. But like, again, I point just to that one specific team. Go look back at the Collins and Martin team that got hot. That nobody was expecting them to make it to the Sweet 16. They barely made it into the NCAA tournament. And that's not to say this team's going to do that, because this team could be like last year's team that, finished the regular season 18-9 and then got bounced in the first round by in a lackluster performance against what ended up being a Cinderella team against Oregon State. So that could happen to this team. They could go the way of one of those other teams and have a surprisingly good March and postseason run. So I mean, there's, like you said, everything this team wants to do is still on the table, Gene, but they still have to figure out. And I just don't think this is as bad of a team as people are thinking because of just after this Kentucky loss or after the LSU loss. I think this team maybe isn't as good as preseason hopes were, but it's not a bad team. I'm not expecting them to finish with a losing record in SEC play. I'm expecting them to still be a 6 seed or better in the NCAA tournament. It's going to depend on, what matchups they get and how far they can go. But I've seen a lot of people more than usual now being on the train of, okay, Rick Barnes, it's time to move on from him when the season's over or whatever. And I'm like, I mean, I don't think he's going to be Tennessee's head coach for the next 5 years, probably at this point. But like, Tennessee would be stupid to move on from him right now at this point. Like, unless he steps down himself, Tennessee letting him go, for one, they owe him a ton of money in the buyout. And 2, they're not going to, because who like, I hate using the whole who you going to get type of thing, but who would you get? Like, I have Steve Forbes circled on my thing because I like Steve Forbes as a person, and he's doing a good job this year at Wake Forest, but he's had 2 years at Wake Forest, and his first year was not very good. Granted, he took over a really bad situation there, but like, they're solid, but like, he's the only one that pops my head as a guy that is like a legitimate person who I can think of that Tennessee has a legitimate shot of getting, that I think would be a good fit at Tennessee. I mean, even he's like, I would still have questions if he would have success here. I think he would, but you don't know. So that had to have like 3 or 4 different points there you can kind of talk about, Gene, but I just think like you said, there's plenty still for this team to accomplish. Can they? I don't know. I'm not going to bet and say that they will, but like, I just don't think this team is bad. I think that they're just not great. I don't think they're an elite team. I think they're a second round of the NCAA tournament. They can win the first round, and can they get into the Sweet 16? Maybe, if it depends on the matchups. I'm not willing to write them off yet, but I'm also not willing to say, okay, they can bounce back and make it to the Elite Eight or something like that. I think they're an okay team. They're not a great team.
Right. So they've got 14 games left, and they're still trying to put some stuff together as far as who does what. Are there shakeups ahead? Perhaps, I don't know. It seems like I understand the excitement about seeing Huntley-Hatfield do some stuff, but slow down. He did it. He entered the game. It was 81-57.
You brought that up. I do want to mention that because that was another quote from Rick Barnes after the game that got a lot of attention, where he was asked about why didn't he play Huntley-Hatfield earlier in the game? Why did he play him late? And his comment basically was saying that he didn't want to play him early to potentially shake his confidence because Tennessee was getting blown out and the game was getting away from him. And I think people took it as like, I saw people reacting and saying, well, what if you put him in that game and he played the way he did and he gains confidence? I let you talk about that because I was letting you kind of talk here, but I'm glad you mentioned that because I did want to bring up Huntley-Hatfield. So go ahead and you can sound off on that too, because I think I have kind of mixed feelings on my opinion of what Barnes' answer was to that and how he handled that situation.
Right. Well, I mean, I think it's pretty simple in my opinion. I mean, it's not as though Barnes has some history of not playing freshmen to where everybody said, well, why are we not playing him? Why are we not playing? Well, this is what Barnes does. He played Kamwa as a freshman. He's played, the list is long of guys that he's played as a freshman. And so I'm just of the opinion, just from understanding, everything that happens around the program, that perhaps the reason why Huntley-Hatfield's not playing is because there's something that he's seeing in practice every single day that is keeping him from putting him on the court, because why else would he? He doesn't like him. Come on, man. Like he played the last 10 minutes of the game, and I get it. He scored 11 points. I get that. So while he should be playing 35, take focus. No, we're not going to do that. I do think that maybe I did. Look, you and I have talked about this. I've said that you've got to play that kid. I've said it. How much do you sneak 3 to 5 minutes in and a half? Sure, Barnes has done that. Huntley-Hatfield has not really always done well with those 3 to 5 first half minutes. And like, if you do it for those 3 to 5, I mean, Powell's starting to get on the court a little bit more, right? So, Barnes is showing, if you go out there and you pay attention to detail and do what, we're kind of asking you, you're going to get some of those minutes. I think we're almost to a point now where it wouldn't stun me if Barnes is begging Huntley-Hatfield, come get these minutes, man. They're there for you. Like they're there for him. But he plays in the last 10 minutes of the game. I don't know how much he played in the first half. Like the stat sheet it says 0 minutes. So
he played 0.
I'm assuming a couple of seconds. Because putting him on there does suggest that he played. I just don't know. Otherwise, you wouldn't put him on there.
I guess that's fair. But yeah, from what I remember, he didn't play any in the first half. Unless it was in the final seconds of the game, or seconds of the first half. I don't remember him playing.
Yeah, I kept going through the whatchamacallit, and I just kept looking for his name. Never saw it, but it said 0 minutes, and I guess maybe that's just a glitch because because Meshack also was technically. Oh no, never mind. That's the first half. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't know the details. I don't know, but they've got to figure something out because the production is. They're not getting the production from the interior. But I don't think one thing about it is, this is not exactly breaking news. From the moment they got these guys, I know I questioned, what are you going to do on the interior?
Mm-hmm.
What are you going to do? What are you going to do with there? This is not breaking news that, oh, wow, Tennessee may have some interior concerns. This has always been the case. And I said that with Huntley-Hatfield, with Jonas Adu, all those guys, because they're learning new positions. They're learning new positions. Don't look at the star ranking. Watch the film. Watch how those kids don't play inside. Look, if you want to blame Barnes for recruiting these kids, we also got to blame the kids for, hey, you knew you were going to a system where you don't exactly just go 5 out and play outside. You're going to be asked to play some on the interior. If you don't like that, that's kind of a you problem because you knew. It's not like Barnes is some brand new coach. If you watch Tennessee for years, you know that they like to throw the ball inside. It's been there. It's been there. That was why I question all the stuff that we've said, all the stuff that's been happening around the program. I don't mean that in a bad way. I just meant that in terms of like, hey, I don't know, I don't think these guys are going to be immediate contributors. I question maybe a dude just because he could maybe, block some shots or whatever. Huntley-Hatfield, I said you need to play him, but I don't know where you play him at. Because unless you want to go bigger and play with Josiah Jordan-James at the 3, but he's struggling to hit shots. So you can't really play them because your shooting gets worse. You got that 3-point guard look. That seems to be doing okay at times. Not always. So again, I don't know. I think there's still a lot of questions. You said it. There's a lot of questions still surrounding this program. And the unfortunate part about that is it's January 17th. You kind of want more answers than questions at this point. But since that 2018-2019 team, every year, like you're really trying to incorporate a lot of new pieces, a lot of new bodies. Because that was the year, that was the exception. Offensively, that was the exception. That team was the exception because it had everybody back. All these other teams are figuring stuff out. It doesn't sound sexy to say that, but that's the reality of the situation. And I don't care about his salary. I don't care about any of that stuff. I don't think that, I understand fans care about the salary, but they shouldn't. It should not matter just because the coach makes $1.7 million or 5.0 or whatever the number may be. It doesn't mean that you should expect anything more or less from that coach. You should expect to win games. You should expect to be competitive. Right now, Tennessee has been that. They got beat Saturday and your feelings are hurt. And so now you want to sit here and point fingers. That should not be the case right now. I still think this is a good team. They've got some stuff to figure out, maybe some personnel decisions. I don't know exactly what those answers are, but I'm not paid to make those decisions. I don't want to even speculate on them, but I do think that maybe something they should try is maybe figuring out a way to get Huntley-Hatfield in the lineup. Maybe it's just 15 minutes a game. But I'm not getting excited because he scored 10 minutes in a game they were down by 30 when he got in.
Yeah.
Because if you notice, he played those 10 minutes, and it's not like Tennessee got any closer. He came in, it was 81-55. The final score was 107-79. That's -2. So it's not like he came in and led some grand comeback. He came in and he played the last 10 minutes of the game that they were getting blown out. He's talented. I think he's going to be a really good player. I do think he's a pro. I don't know where. I don't know how. I don't know any of those details. But look, again, I'm not exactly sure. I'm not exactly paid to make those decisions either. So they're going to figure it out. Barnes is too good of a coach for them to not figure it out. They're going to be a tournament team. They're too good to not be a tournament team unless they completely fall apart, which I don't see happening. So the question is, how can you build yourself up over these next 14 regular season games, plus whatever you do in the tournament, to make sure that you're the best version of yourself come March? Because you've got guys who've been through some battles, some wars. They were likely an NIT team 2 years ago, possibly an NCAA tournament team if they continued to get hot and rode Fulkerson that year to the tournament. Last year, they were a tournament team. They've got guys back from that team. I still think this is a team that can win. We'll just have to see exactly how they make it happen. But I think that they've got the team that's talented enough to make it happen.
I really quickly, while you were talking and while absorbing what you were saying too, was looking at Tennessee's remaining schedule like I did just a minute ago, and on KidPalm, I was kind of figuring out like in my head like who I think Tennessee loses to and who I think they beat. I very easily can see Tennessee finishing the regular season with an 11-7 SEC record, which I've now gone back. I've gone back basically now to the point where it's right before the very first year, but that SEC expanded and did away with the divisions. 11-7 gets you every year, just about every 11-7 gets you competing for, if not that top 4 seed. that gives you that double bye in the tournament. I've yet to find a year where an 11-7 team wouldn't have been competing or have gotten a double bye in the SEC tournament in the new format. But here's one. The only year that I can see so far that I found was the 2012-2013 season, which would have been Conzo's second year at Tennessee. Tennessee went 11-7, and they finished tied with Missouri for 5th in the SEC that year. And Kentucky was the 4 seed, where Bama was one of the 2, and they were 12-6. So, like, the majority of the seasons in the SEC since they've gone to the new format with no divisions, an 11-7 record gets you a double bye. And that's what I said at the beginning of the year. It's what you said at the beginning of the year. We thought Tennessee was good enough to be a top 4 team and get a double bye in this conference. And I think they're still good enough to do it. And they're going to have plenty of competition because Kentucky, LSU, and Auburn, I think those 3 are going to get the top 3 spots. I don't know who finishes where, but I think those 3 are the top 3 teams in the SEC. And I think it's going to be very difficult to unseat them. Right now, as I see it, like, Texas A&M is playing well. I'm very curious to see if they continue this, because they've played a lot better under Buzz Williams this year than I expect them to, because they've not had very good years the past couple of years. They're currently 2nd in the SEC. They're one of the only 2 undefeated teams left in the SEC, along with Auburn. Mississippi State, I thought they'd be a decent team. They're playing pretty well. They're 3-1, they're 12-4 overall. I don't know that I'll be interested to see if Arkansas and Alabama can bounce back. And, like, they've had rough starts as well, along with Tennessee, but they're both teams that are around that same 11-5 mark that Tennessee is. I don't really expect Florida to bounce back. I don't expect South Carolina, Ole Miss, Missouri, or Georgia to really make too much noise. Vandy, I think, will fall in the rankings. So Tennessee is really, in my opinion, going to be competing with an A&M, a Mississippi State, a Bama, and an Arkansas for that 4th spot. Can they get it? Like, that's the thing. Last year, Tennessee fought for that 4th spot, and they ended up getting it and edging out Florida at the end for that spot. And obviously, Tennessee last year, made it to that 4th spot, but they didn't do well in the SEC tournament or NCAA tournament. But I don't know, Gene. I just think that I'm like with you. Like, I'd rather have more answers than questions, or more answers than we have right now. But also at the same time, like, we're barely like 4th of the way through the SEC slate of the season right now. We've still got a lot of games left on the schedule, and we're still in mid-January. So we're a month and a half away from postseason time, basically. So, I mean, we've got a lot of questions still about this team, and not nearly as many answers as you would like. But every team has questions right now. Baylor just lost. Baylor was number 1 in the country, undefeated, and they lost 2 games in a row at home this past week. Like, that's bizarre to me. Like, that happened. There was another team that had a really bad week on the men's side of things too. That was kind of shocking. I'm trying to remember who it was, but there were a couple like top 15 teams this week that had just bad weeks. And you're like, well, I thought we knew more about this team, but suddenly things have changed quite dramatically with the landscape of college basketball because of what happened this past week. And it's only going to get crazier. I mean, teams are going to lose. It's very, very, very difficult, let alone to go undefeated in a regular season nowadays in college basketball, to even go just like with 1, even 2 losses. It's really hard to do that. Tennessee has 5, and can they keep it under 10? Like, that's the question. If Tennessee can keep it under 10 losses in the regular season, I think they'll be a decent team, and they'll be in a decent spot for a decent seed. I just don't think this team is an elite team. Now, you don't have to be, we've talked about before, you don't have to be an elite team to make a deep NCAA tournament run. There have been, we talked about multiple examples of mid-major teams, but even look at some of the high major. Look at Syracuse, several years. They've had some pretty lackluster regular seasons, and because Jim Boeheim is Jim Boeheim, they've gone on and made a Sweet 16 or Elite 8 run in years where they basically were written off, and a lot of people were expecting them to maybe even miss the tournament or get bounced in like a first, second round, and they've gone on to make, again, a deep run. I'm going to pull it up here in a second, but Gene, before we kind of close it out and talk a little bit about Lady Vols, because Lady Vols are worth talking about, that's for sure. They're killing it right now. What, in your opinion, you said it's not time to hit the panic button yet, and I agree with you. It's not time to hit that big red button just yet. What would constitute panic mode time for Tennessee, in your opinion? I mean, it doesn't have to be a specific example. Like, it doesn't have to be like, losing to 25 to a bad team, but in your opinion, what would constitute a panic button moment for Tennessee this season?
If what happens Saturday becomes more normal defensively because that's their brand. Their brand is defense. Their brand is not offense. Like it was, be happy that you scored 80 points in the game. You're getting blown out for pretty much the majority of the game. I understand that, but this team's calling card is defense. And I don't think that's going to happen again. I truly don't. But if they are consistently letting teams look, I don't mean teams shooting 65, whatever it was percent from the field, but if they start having lapses that lead to games, because not every game's going to look the same. Like Tennessee, Kentucky had almost like 75 possessions in that game. Like typically, Tennessee plays games that have like 5 fewer possessions. Not every game is going to have that sort of pace and speed and style to it. And so I don't, but if, like, say against Vandy, they give up like 87 points. Even if they win 92-87, I'd be concerned. And like maybe Vandy shoots like 50-some% from the field, hits a bunch of threes, whatever. If you see those things persist, that would be time to say, okay, there's something wrong with this team. I don't think that's the case right now. I truly don't. And like, I think we're just I think it was a really bad game, man. I don't think I don't think that can be stressed enough. It was a really bad game. But I think a lot of the anger is more just out of, like, feelings are hurt because you got beat by a rival. And yeah, it was televised, but I don't think all that many people were watching. So yeah, Kentucky fans get to make fun of you for a few weeks. It is what it is. Like if you want to go back at them, bring up Barnes' overall record against Calipari. Y'all are even. Y'all can shake hands to keep it going. But if they've got a tough week this week. Vandy, LSU. At Vandy, LSU at home. We'll see over these next 5 games exactly what happens there between those teams. Because look, Texas is better than I thought. I understand we're in a new age of college basketball, so therefore there's new ideologies and new ways that teams are being built. And Beard has done a really good job building that team with a bunch of guys that I thought that the collection of talent being thrown together like that would not work. I've said it. I've been very vocal on that because I don't love that way of putting it together. And to be fair, they're 3-2 in their league in the Big 12, which isn't an awful lot better than the SEC, but they've been good. Although, again, to be fair, they've got one quality victory, I'd say, unless you want to count Stanford. They've got 3, 4. Texas got 4 top 100 victories. Tennessee has 1, 2, 3. Well, 3. Yeah. So that'll be, I'd say that'll actually end up being a pretty balanced sort of affair because they play similar competition. They beat similar competition. It just depends on which league is actually better. But these next few games are going to be telling to me. And to me, it's not about win-loss. It's like, how do you win? How do you lose? If you win a game, but you're having defensive struggles, that is going to come back to bite you. If you lose a game and if you lose a game 67-64, one of those sort of Ole Miss games that are just pesky team, like that's more of who you are. That's more of your calling card. They get the defense back. I don't think I'm too concerned about the rest because you can always figure out ways to be a little bit better offensively. That sometimes is personnel, maybe players, earning more playing time and actually making the most out of it. Because again, guys like Powell, Huntley-Hatfield, those are guys who are really good offensively that I think struggle in some regards from the other side, which is why they don't play. So if they can figure that stuff out, that it actually makes your team better. And not just simply because we score more points. It's because now they are able to bring things to the table. Huntley-Hatfield, I think, could end up being a really good defender because he's long. I don't know how quick he is. I don't think he's all that quick, but he's long and he has the ability to affect a lot of shots while not playing center. And if you're playing like a 4, playing like kind of the same position that Yves Pons plays, and you're 6'11" and you're able to affect stuff, is a lot different than having to be a guy who's out there battling in the post against a guy 6'10" or whatever, who's just able to shoot little jump hooks over you or whatever. Maybe you block one of those. So we'll see what happens with their personnel, if maybe some guys can kind of emerge, because I think it's about the time where you start to see maybe a guy or two emerge, and maybe start playing a bigger role. They probably need one or two guys to start playing a bigger role, and maybe one or two guys to maybe take a step back. I'm not here to say and project who I think those people are. Just say I think it's about that time. But those guys got to earn it. And if those guys do it, then it's because of what they did in practice, which means they've now done the things that Barnes needs to see for them to get on the court, which again, in turn, makes that team better. So it's going to take a while for me to get there, to get to panic button. I think we're just kind of it was a bad game on the road, I might add, against a team that really could end up being, their last two losses are against teams that should be playing in at least the second weekend of March.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And really quickly here, before we transition to Lady Vols talk, I wanted to mention Syracuse. Their last three deep tournament runs, because you go back to their fourth one, and they were like 30 and 10 or something like that. They had a really good regular season too. But 2 years ago, I guess last season, actually, technically, they finished 15-8 in the regular season, 9-7 in the ACC, and then ended up going to the Sweet 16. So, not a great regular season by any stretch of the imagination. They won one game, then lost Virginia in the ACC tournament, and then went to a Sweet 16. A few years ago in the 17-18 season, they went 19-12 in the regular season, 8-10 in ACC play, and they were a bubble team, and they made it they had to play in the first four, like that opening weekend that isn't technically the opening round, and they had to beat Arizona State to even get into the main field, barely beat TCU, barely beat Michigan State, and then played Duke tough in the Sweet 16. You go back to their last, I think, Elite Eight, maybe Final Four appearance. Which one was this? Did they make was this the Final Four? Yeah, in the Final Four, they made a Final Four run after finishing the regular season 19-12, lost the only game they played in the ACC tournament, and were 19-13 going into Selection Sunday, and then they made it to the Final Four, and they went 9-9 in ACC play that year. So again, Syracuse has a different pedigree. Jim Boeheim is a different coach than Rick Barnes even. But my point is that you can have mediocre regular seasons or regular seasons that you can barely get on the bubble, and then all of a sudden you go out and just get hot, or you have the right mixture, you got the right matchups, and you make it to a deep tournament run. I'm not saying I expect Tennessee to do that this year, because I don't, but the regular season isn't everything. Regular season is important, and you have to answer a lot of questions in the regular season, but Tennessee can have a somewhat lackluster regular season and still go have postseason success. And a lot of people think that's the only thing that matters in college basketball. So that's the case. Then why do you care if Tennessee goes 19-12 or 20-11 in the regular season if they go out and make it to the Sweet 16 or Elite Eight? So anyway, Gene, we can close out the show here talking about the real number one team in the state of Tennessee, and that is the Lady Vols, because they are killing it. They were on the opposite end of the Kentucky beatdown on Sunday. They trailed 17-11 after the first quarter and went on to just absolutely demolish Kentucky. And they did that without having, to me, they're the sneaky MVP of the team, Tamari Key, because I think without her, this team isn't what they are defensively or even offensively. But she was not available at all the second half after getting injured in the second quarter. And good news, it seems like that's not a severe injury. Kelly Harper said after the game that it's going to be day to day, and Tennessee has a whole week off. They're not playing anybody midweek this week. They don't play again until next Sunday. They play Georgia, which is a ranked team. They're another ranked opponent. The Lady Vols win 84-58 in the We Back Pat game, and out rebounded Kentucky 50-29. Ray Burrell had her best game back since her injury, had 14 points, was a perfect 4 from 3. Now, Horston didn't have a great game that she usually has, but still finished 11-7. Jordan Walker had 10-6. Alexis Dye had 9-7. King Green had some phenomenal minutes filling in for Tamari Key. It had 14 and 7. I mean, Gene, it was just like it was basically just a dismantling because Lady Vols, I mean, they weren't the sharpest they were on offense and still scored 84 points in that game. And it wasn't like they shot a bunch of free throws. They went to the free throw line 12 times, and to their credit, they made 10 of them. That was their best free throw shooting game, I thought, of the year so far. But they made threes, and that was something they've missed all year. Obviously Ray Burrell 4-4, that was the big one, but you had Tess Darby also hit 3 of her 6. Like that was the difference, and the offense was missing was that extra 3-point threat that Ray Burrell gave them. And aside from Ryan Howard, I mean, Kentucky didn't have anything. She was 11 of 21 for 24 points. The rest of the team scored 34 points total, and most of that came from Jasmine Massengale, former Lady Vol, who had 13 points in the game. I mean, if it wasn't for Ryan Howard, I mean, I don't know where Kentucky would have been in that game, because they wouldn't have been anywhere close to the final score, what it was. But I think it's still, we're talking about this is still mid-January. I mean, Lady Vols, you hope they're not peaking at this point, because this is not where you want to be playing your best basketball. You want to be playing your best basketball in March. But Gene, the confidence that I see from these players and the confidence I have when I'm watching the games is something I haven't felt and or seen since the Pat Summit days. And that to me is the difference in this team. The coaching is different. Like, I think they're a very well coached team. And I think the team chemistry is the best it's been in years, because I think these players actually genuinely like each other and play for each other. And I think that was reflected in Ray Burrell's post-game press conference. I think it's been reflected in a lot of different comments from players and stuff after games. But I think this team, I think you can actually tell they like each other and they respect each other, and they actually really like each other as teammates. And there's not very much selfishness going on in the locker room this time. That has been an issue with Lady Vols in years past. And I don't think it's an issue anymore with this team. And I think that to me, and the consistency on defense is the biggest differences from the last 5-6 years of Lady Vol basketball.
Right. So I'm not really, I mean, I was at the game yesterday. I had a chance to kind of take it in. And that Kentucky team's not very good. Like, they have zero height. Which means they have zero answer for Key or Green. They got pounded on the boards. Let me see exactly just how bad it was. 50-29, and 21 of those were offensive. And like, I watched, like, Kentucky's only chance was a first quarter where I'm pretty sure Ryan Howard had like either 9 or 11 of the 17 points, and Kentucky had the lead. And as the game went on, you just kind of looked and, like, that it's not a good team. But as far as Tennessee was concerned, just showing different ways that they could be effective. Green is no slouch. She's been a very good college player. She just hasn't really had the opportunities in Knoxville to really show all of that. But that's because she's behind a difference maker inside. She's a good player. Green's a good player. She's not a difference maker. Like, Key can affect one side of the court. And that's important. She can completely affect one side of the court. And you can get the offensive stuff. Like, you've got players offensively. Ray Burrell was hitting shots. I think she was 4 for 4 from 3. I mean, you've got players to hit shots. Like, Horston is such a good player. Darby affects you from 3-point range. They've got everybody that they played did solid work yesterday. That's a great team. Di is really good. I mean, she's just figured out exactly where she can be effective. It's attacking the basket, it's hitting mid-range shots. She took a 3 yesterday. I don't remember it. She missed it, but she's effective. And so they've got a team that is completely bought in on the roles that are necessary for them to play, for them to be effective. And as they bounce, as they show who their rotation is, it's Di, it's Walker, it's Key when she's healthy, it's Darby, it's Horston. Miles got some first half minutes, but really it's Burrell and Green coming off the bench. As long as those players become very content in what they're being asked to do, this team's going to continue to win, because they are a really good team. Like, that was an overwhelming victory yesterday, and against a team that is good. They're not deep. I mean, Kentucky only has, I think, 9 players. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, they only have 9 players. And some of those players didn't even get in the game until the game was already over, more or less. And, when you don't have those options, like, yeah, you're going to play what you've got. And that's a decent team. That's not a team that's going to go very far unless Ryan Howard has one of those Kemba Walker sort of experiences in March, which I just don't foresee, although she is great. And, she could end up being the number 1 pick in the draft. But yeah, like today's about Tennessee. And that was a dominating victory over a really good team. I'm sorry, a dominating victory over a good team with a really good player. And it just adds to the list of dominating victories they have, because they have depth, they have size, they have speed, they have quickness, they have everything you need. Like they shot it great yesterday. That's not something they typically do. Mm-hmm. They have all the ingredients to make a deep run in March.
We've said it about the men's side, but and you mentioned it there, it holds true for the women's side too. Like the truly great teams are teams that can win in many different ways. The Lady Vols have shown that this year. They can win if the game is only in the 40s. I mean, Tennessee beat, granted, is earlier in the year, but they beat UCF 49-41. The Lady Vols can win really ugly defensive contests. They can also win when they need to put up more points and then put a bunch of points. I mean, they didn't have to put up a bunch of points against Kentucky, but I'm talking about ever since Ray Burrell's come back, this team has been able to score at least 70 points in the game. I think every time that, except for the Vanderbilt game, that she's been on the court. So they can do it when I don't know. I'd be interested to see if the 3-point shooting really continues, because it does seem like Tess Darby has really found that different gear in SEC play. And now that it looks like Ray Burrell is finally healthy and, got her legs back underneath her and everything, it seems like she's knocked off the rust finally. And she's not going to be 100% every game moving forward from 3. But if she can even just make 30% of them, that's and gives Tennessee another option besides just Tess Darby from 3. That opens up a lot more possibilities on offense than they've had in they had the first month and a half of the year when she was gone. So I think, to your point of on the men's side, and you just mentioned it with the Lady Vols a second ago, they can win in a multitude of ways. They're not just a one-dimensional team. Now their defense is a lot better than their offense on average, but the offense is now showing that they can find more ways to score, more ways to do things. Again, like you said, the Kentucky team didn't have a lot of height. Can Tennessee do this against a team that has better post players than Kentucky? Because that would be the different question. If Tamari Key is shut down in terms of offensive league, if she gets touches and she's being bullied, and not really bullied, but if she's not effective in the paint where the Lady Vols can have kind of inside out offense, if Kean Green can't do some things on offense either when she's in there, if Alexis Dye isn't able to cut the basket, like you said, she's found her way of contributing on this team. If she's being shut down, then if the Lady Vols have to really truly rely on a perimeter game and more of a mid-range game, can they be effective? And if they can't, I think their defense can win games for them, because they did that earlier this year when they weren't having much offensive success at all. I mean, people may have forgotten, but look at some of the scores in those early games. They beat Southern Illinois 59-49, UCF 49-41, USF 52-49. That Texas game was the first time we saw any offense, and it was 74-70 in an overtime game. But 68-58 at Kansas, and Virginia Tech was 64-58. They did win 80-55 against Oklahoma State, but like there weren't very many high scoring games. At the start of the SEC slate, they beat Alabama 62-44. So like there hasn't been a bunch of scoring from Tennessee until lately. And even then it's been like still in the low 70s for the most part up until the Kentucky game. So I'm with you. Like what truly makes teams great is the fact that you can win in different styles. You don't just use the same style over and over and over again to win, because like that's what happened with Virginia for years on the men's side. They use that really slow tempo, really good defense, and they would get bounced in the second round of the NCAA tournament a lot. It wasn't until they really started to pick up their offense and still play with a slower tempo, but have more efficient offense and actually have some good offensive players, that they're able to finally break that get that monkey off their back and actually go win a title and have some success in the NCAA tournament. I'm trying to hold back my expectations for this Lady Vols team, because I'm trying not to get too excited, because maybe it's just the Vol fan in me, and I've been burned too many times, Gene. But I have high hopes for this team. I legitimately do. I'm not expecting a Final Four. I'm really not. But this team, they're number 1 in the SEC right now, but they also still have to play They haven't played the top other 4 teams in the SEC much, if at all, at this point, I think, because they still have South Carolina on the schedule. They still have some really tough teams on the schedule. They still have LSU, which they haven't played yet. In fact, they won't play LSU to the regular season finale. But I think this is to me, it's definitely the best team they've also had in a long time. That's reflected in the record, because it's not like they've played a soft schedule up to now, and their only loss is to Stanford. This is the best start the Lady Vols have had to a season since the last time they won a national championship in that 2007-08 team. So I'm basically saying I'm trying to temper my expectations, and I think they are, because I'm fully not expecting this team to go win a title or this team to even make a Final Four. But I am very impressed with this team, and I think that number 5 ranking is very warranted. In fact, you could argue they could be ahead of an NC State or Louisville based on what NC State and Louisville has done and kind of who they lost to and stuff. But this Lady Vols team is legit. And Gene, I've said it already multiple times on the Lady Vol Basketball Fever podcast. That UConn game, I know they'll be without Paige Beckers probably still at that point on February 6th. Man, I cannot wait for that game. That game is. I'm more excited for that game than I am any other game on the schedule for the men's or women's side, either one. Like that game, I cannot wait to watch Tennessee and UConn play this season. That one's going to be fun, a lot of fun up in Hartford.
And I think that could be, it may be a diminished product, but look, man, women's college basketball typically stockpiles the talent in about 9 different places, like 9 or 10 different schools typically get all the top players. So they don't have Beckers, but they've also had like 10 or 12 games to adjust to life without Beckers. So they still should be a really good team. And it's a game at Stores. So I don't think anybody's going to be exactly tearing up because they don't have, she's a great player, as good of a player as there is in the country. Probably the best player in the country. But like nobody's going to be shedding tears, because it's kind of like Alabama losing a wide receiver, a 5-star wide receiver. Is like, you got others, so UConn is like, you lost a 5-star player. That's a great player. You lost quite possibly the best player in women's college basketball. You've got other great ones. Vina Westbrook is still up there. Other great players are still up there. You've had enough time to adjust to her loss to still be a really good team when those 2 teams play.
Oh yeah, and also again, I'm not expecting Beckers to be back like anytime super soon, but she was out here without her crutches when UConn played this weekend. So I mean, she's making progress, and they also have that really good freshman, supposedly really good freshman, Azzi Fudd. I don't know how you say her first name. She hasn't played since November 22nd. She's running on a treadmill and hopes to return from her right foot injury very soon. So, I mean, again, you may be without Paige Beckers, but you could be getting back a star freshman just in time to play Tennessee. And then you could also, again, it's not like you have a bad roster without Paige Beckers. They're still a top 10 team, and it's going to be a legitimate top 10 matchup unless UConn or Tennessee loses before then. I still think both teams will be in the top 10, but it'll be a legit top 10 matchup when that's on noon, which I think is weird, but noon on Fox on that Sunday, February 6th. But I'm very excited for that. And I'm still excited for the men's team. Like I know people are probably down on them a lot more now because of what happened in the Kentucky game, but man, I'm still looking forward to it. I still think this Vanderbilt game is going to be, it's going to be tougher than what people are going to want to admit. I think again, it being on the road, especially, and Vandy still not their bottom half of the SEC, I think, and when it's all said and done, but they're playing better, man. And Scottie Pippen is more than capable of having a type of performance that Tate Washington had against Tennessee this past weekend, where he dropped 26 or 28 or wherever he did. I mean, he's scoring basically 19 a game right now. In conference play, what is he totaling? In conference play, he is averaging 21 points per game in 4 games for Vandy, and he's shooting 55% from 2, 33% from 3, and he's attempting almost 10 free throws a game. And he's got 21, 5 assists and 2 boards and a steal and a half per game. 5 turnovers per game, but I mean, he's a young guy, but still, like, Scottie Pippen Jr. is a legit. He'll be one of the best players Tennessee faces this year, regardless of position. But they're 10-6. Stackhouse is your boy Stackhouse, Gene. He's actually doing okay. Their 2 SEC wins have come against Arkansas, and then they beat Georgia. So, I mean, Georgia's not very good, but the Arkansas win was a legit win. Is on the road, and it was a 75-74 victory over an Arkansas team that is not nearly as good this year, but they're still not that awful team either. So I don't know. I don't really have any other closing thoughts other than that. I think that this is going to be an interesting end of January. I will say that for the men's team and for the women's team too, but definitely the men's team, to go back to them for just a second as we close out the show. January is just a tough month for this team, looking at the schedule. So I don't know, Gene. I don't know if you have any closing thoughts you want to end with or not, but if not, we can go ahead and end the show here.
I'll simply say this, because you see it everywhere. Like, yeah, Saturday was tough, but be mindful that we don't necessarily know the health of every single player, of every single team that is being laid out there. So just because they're testing negative doesn't mean that they're not feeling some effects. It was a bad game. Bad games happen. I'm not here to make an excuse for anybody or suggest anything, but I mean, that is something to take in consideration. Look, it stunk. I think they'll be fine. I still think they're a good team. Nobody ever thought this was going to be a national championship contender. I think they're a good team, that will remain a good team, and we'll see what happens going forward.
I think that's a good way of saying it. And I think that's a good place to go ahead and end the show here. Again, thank you all so much. If you're watching this on YouTube, if you're listening on your phone or laptop or tablet or computer, whatever, no matter how you're taking in the show, we really appreciate it. And I want to say thank you. You've made the start of 2022 really good so far. We're halfway through the month and already making really big strides in some of the viewership numbers and whatnot for the show here. So thank you all so much. We really, really, really appreciate it. Signing off for Gene, I'm Nathanael Rutherford, and this has been another episode of the Vol Basketball Fever Podcast. Thank you for watching Vol Basketball Fever. Give this video a like and subscribe to the channel while you're here. We appreciate all your support, and the show wouldn't be possible without Vol fans like you. Thank you.